I'm going to invite a friend of mine up this morning to kind of help us jump back into our Sermon on the Mount. I'm going to invite Owen Singleton to come up here, and I want to do a quick little interview with Owen. And yes, he knew this was happening. This is not a surprise to him, but here, I'm going to give you this mic right here. I'll explain why here, if you'll give me just a couple of minutes to establish a baseline here. Owen, you grew up around here, correct?
Yes.
So most of you know Owen, or you at the very least know his family or know of his family. Tell me what you did for school, though, recently.
So just about 3 weeks, 1 month, time flies. I graduated from Purdue with my bachelor's degree in chemistry.
Now, first off, time's going to start flying a lot faster than it has so far, but you are correct, time flies. Secondly, a degree in what again? I just want to emphasize that.
Chemistry.
Degree in chemistry, okay? And what are you doing now since you graduated?
So I start work tomorrow at AmeriQual working in a food science role.
Okay, and so what does that mean? What are you going to be doing?
I will be in charge of making sure that the MREs and the other processed foods that go through the plant are fully cooked so that they're safety for 40 years or whatever the desired shelf life is.
Okay, and where does the chemistry part of your degree, where does that come into what you're doing?
A lot of it is understanding the different types of foods, because foods are really just complicated chemicals. So understanding proteins are different from sugars or different from carbohydrates. They all behave differently when they're under heat, so that's where the chemistry comes into it.
Okay. Now, I do want you to know, as we talk about chemistry stuff this morning, that you all might think that I know nothing about chemistry, and you would actually be correct. Although, I was, at one point, a teacher's assistant for my chemistry teacher in high school, which means I knew how to check if they had answered A or they had answered B on the test. So that was about the extent of mine. That's why I'm not up here talking about this. I brought somebody who knows what they're talking about when it comes to chemistry. In fact, I was informed this morning that you and one of your brothers actually have a little bit of chemistry stuff going on at home. What does that look like?
So a lot of that came from me harassing and bothering Cyrus a lot. And so he asked me...
Wait, a brother harassed a brother?
Yeah.
That doesn't sound right at all. No. Okay.
And he came and asked me, well, if you come and teach me something and you do it for a couple weeks and then I take a test and I get a good grade, does that mean I can have like 3 days where you don't bother me? And I told him sure. So he's been learning a little bit of organic chemistry at the tender age of like 12.
Okay, now I'm even more happy that I asked that question because I didn't know about the whole, this was an agreement so that you'd leave him alone. That's incredible. So you went to school, and did you say where you went to school?
Purdue.
Purdue. All right, so you went to school at Purdue, you got a chemistry degree, you are now home, you're back here, you're away from school, you're working and using your degree while at the same time teaching your younger brother chemistry. So I think it's safe to say that you know a little bit about chemical compounds and chemistry stuff.
Yes, I worked as a tutor, so I'm very used to explaining chemistry to people who don't like chemistry. So I'll give you guys the simplest version to understand what we need to understand.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, how many of you would raise your hands willingly and admit that you were one of those people he just referenced that don't like chemistry? That's not bad. That's good.
There are people not telling the truth. I know there are people that just don't want to hurt my feelings.
I just kind of assume whenever I ask them to raise their hands that only about half of the people who want to raise their hands are actually raising their hands. So anyway, all right, I know you haven't had a chance to test this or anything. And if you have some quick test, if you want to taste it or whatever, that's totally up to you. What is this?
Most likely salt.
It's supposed to be. So what is salt in a chemistry compound? I don't know the words to this. I just answered A and B on the tests.
So salt actually refers to a whole class of chemicals. It's anything that has ionic bonds and generally a crystal structure. But when people say salt, they almost always mean this right here, which is sodium chloride, which is just a positive sodium ion bonded with one chloride ion, and it's arranged in a cubic structure. So if you let a salt solution dry, you'll see little cubes form on the surface.
And that would be, if I'm not mistaken, NaCl.
Correct.
Yes. You might have put that in the text, and that might have been where I actually got that, but I might have even known it. Okay, so yes, this is supposedly salt. I'm not trying to pull something over on you. What are some uses for this?
Its main uses are a seasoning or a preservative, but there are also some uses in organic synthesis where you can get certain chemicals to come out of a solution if you add salt to it.
Okay. So in history, we also see that salt, and you mentioned as a flavoring or as a seasoning, they would actually use salt to flavor the sacrifices that they were making to the gods so that it would be more pleasant to the palate of the gods when they would burn their sacrifices or give their sacrifices. It also, so we have, this is table salt. We set it on our tables. It would also be used as a phrase that they would use, like, would you share salt with me? And what that would mean would be literally, would you share a meal with me? So just using the word salt would become an invitation into community with one another. So all sorts of different uses for this. We also use it on roads is it the same? I mean, I know it's not table salt, but it's still salt, right? Or is it not? Is that just what we call it?
But I know they recently started going to sugar from beets.
Sugar? So kids are going to start licking the roads now?
Hopefully. It's a little bit less effective, but it's a lot better for your car's undercarriage.
Okay, so our cars will be nice and sweet. That is good. All right, one final question. Actually, that just gets me thinking. No, I'm not going to go there. All right, I want to, but I'm not going to. One final question for you. If salt loses any element of its saltiness, is it still salt?
No. And we've tried. I'm sure a lot of you either learned in school or had a doctor say it to you, but too much sodium in your diet is not good for you. And the sodium part of sodium chloride, which is salt, is what gives it that distinct flavor. And so being people, we've said, okay, how can we get the good things without the bad things? And so there are two elements on the periodic table that are very similar to sodium that we've tried to replace sodium with and still get that salty taste. But we run into problems. One of them, lithium, it has a salty taste, but it's not quite. It's just not quite right. And it also works as a mood stabilizer for people with manic depressive disorder.
Okay.
So it's not something you want to be consuming if you do not have that condition. The other one is potassium, and it tastes also salty, but once you get more of it, it gets a very bitter taste. So there's really no way to get that salty taste that we enjoy so much without using sodium chloride. There's not any real good substitute for salt.
Okay. So no matter how hard we try and how much we've worked on it, and theoretically someday maybe we would figure it out, but to this point, it can't happen. It's either salt or it's not salt.
Yep, it's pretty much all or nothing.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Owen. Thank Owen for coming up here. So I want you to keep that in your mind, that answer that he just gave there. Obviously, we know that using salt inappropriately or incorrectly, too much of it can cause damage. He just mentioned that in your diet, too much salt can be a bad thing. We know this. Too much salt on a road can erode the road. Too much, or just having salt, period, on the road is bad for the undercarriage of our car. So now they're starting to sweeten the roads instead. So, we know that it can be used inappropriately, but I want you to hang on to that idea, that answer that he gave, that if it's not salty, it's not salt. You can't take out a piece of it or temporarily make it not salt. When you take that out, it's no longer salt. And I want you to hang on to that as we transition to an idea of light. We all know what light is. We have lights shining on us right now. Light can be used it can be used to shine the way for us so that we can see things. In fact, we even make statements like we shed the light on something, and that means we see the truth of something. We see it come to fruition. Or just literally, light is shining on this piece of wood up here, and because of that, I can see it. If the lights were all off, we couldn't see it. Light is used for things like navigation. We don't use them as often anymore because we have so many other ways to do it. But lighthouses were actually a vital part of travel, not really all that long ago in our history, to where when a boat would come up upon a rocky shore, there would be a lighthouse there that would shine out, that would warn that boat, hey, danger is ahead. And so light was used for safety and navigation, and it still is. Light has all kinds of different purposes to it. But ultimately, what light does is it shines. It helps us to see. Now, if we looked at the history of light, many of us would probably go and we would immediately think, if we remember back far enough to our time in school, we would remember this guy named Thomas Edison. A guy who invented the commercial light bulb that we use all over the place now, or some version of it. He started the usage of it. So we would go to Thomas Edison when we think of light. But we would know inherently that while that changed how we use light and where light was available and what places you could walk into and have 24/7 light, we would know that that was not the beginning of the history of light. In fact, if you look at the light bulb, we know when we study it that Thomas Edison wasn't actually the first one to put forth a light bulb of some kind. He was the first one to invent the commercial light bulb, which is more what we consider to be a light bulb now, but he didn't start it. And so we know that light didn't start with the light bulb, so maybe we would think back a little bit further, and if we're thinking of the history of light, we would think of when fire was discovered. Or at least the ability to make fire, because at that point, light was now able to go into places it couldn't previously go. You could put light on the end of a stick, and you could watch into a cave, and you could see what was going on inside the cave, whereas before that, you would walk into a cave, and it would just be pitch dark. But even though it changed how light was used, we know it wasn't the beginning of light. In fact, we know, especially if we are followers of Christ, that light began way before the first fire was made, way before the first light bulb was made. All the way back in Genesis chapter 1, we read that in the beginning, everything was dark. It was formless and empty, and darkness was hovering over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters, and God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And we would read this and we would think this is obviously the beginning of the history of light. But what if that's not the beginning of the history of light? Because as we read through Scripture, we actually see that there was light before Genesis chapter 1. There was light before God spoke those words, "Let there be light." In John chapter 1, we read these words, "In the beginning." So, Genesis 1 says, "In the beginning, everything was dark." John chapter 1 says, "In the beginning." So while it was dark was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. All things were created through him, and apart from him, not one thing was created that has been created. And then catch this, life was in him, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. And so as we study the history of light, we see that yes, there was a light bulb, and there was fire, and there was even God speaking it into existence for our eyes to see, but there was also light before our eyes saw the light. The light was there in the beginning, and it was the light of men. But there's something about light that happens when you try and cover it up. Now, I'm going to use some clear containers here this morning, and that's going to lose a little bit of what we're going to get to later. But I want you to be able to see what happens. Imagine for a second that this is solid, and you can't see through it. I think I don't think we'll lose too much of this because I think we all know what would happen if I put something that was, a solid color over the light. What happens to the light when you put something solid over it? But before it goes out, you can no longer see it. It no longer serves a purpose. So again, imagine that this was a solid piece and I put that over there. You would no longer be able to see the light, and the light would no longer serve any kind of purpose. But beyond that, it eventually goes out. Now, I understand that we live in the 21st century where we can just flip off a switch and the light goes away, and we flip on a switch and the light comes back. But the light that they would have had in the first century would have been a light that if you deprived it of oxygen would be extinguished. And a light that doesn't shine is no longer light. Salt that isn't salty is no longer salt, and a light that doesn't shine is no longer light. Hold on to both of those because I want to talk to you about hills this morning. Now, I've got a picture here from years ago. This was, anyone ever read The Tale of Two Cities where it starts off with it was the best of days and it was the worst of days? This is one of those moments in our family. This is the best of days and this was the worst of days. This is one of those where right now you're seeing smiles-ish on our faces. However, if you run this through ChatGPT and you say, roast this picture, it really gives our fake smiles a really hard time in this picture. I think for the girls, it says something about dad told them you better put a smile on your face or I'm knocking you off this wall or something like that, and that's where these smiles are coming from. This was the end of an incredible hike. I've told you the story before. I'm not going to go into it again. We get to the top, and what we're doing right here is we are sitting on the ledge of a firehouse at the top of Black Elk Peak in South Dakota. Incredible hike, incredible view. And the view, while yes, we are in it, and I could have used AI to remove us from the picture, what I really want you to see is that from this firehouse, you can see for miles. Miles and miles. And it's a little hazy on a clear, perfectly clear day. You could see even further from that picture. And now if you would imagine that the trees were out of there, and somebody hiking from a distance away didn't have to look through trees, this high peak would be visible from the people down low for miles and miles and miles. Now, in our day and in our time, we look at things like this and we look at mountain peaks like this, and what we see, some of us, I know not all of us, but we see recreation. We see an opportunity to have an incredible, or depending on your point of view, not so incredible day. It is an opportunity to put on some hiking shoes, strap a backpack, somewhat similar to some of this stuff, on your back and hike up a mountain and get an awesome view. But in ancient times, people didn't hike mountains. For starters, you couldn't just jump in the car and drive to the mountain that was 20 miles away from you, or in our case in this picture, 4 hours away from you. So it took time to get there. But they didn't hike them because they were pretty busy. They didn't have just a bunch of leisure time to go and hike a mountain. But beyond even that, they didn't hike mountains because mountains were the places where the gods lived. Mountains weren't the places that humans went to visit. Hills weren't the places for you and I to walk up on top of and enjoy the view. The view was meant to be for the gods alone. They were the only ones invited up there because it was closer to the heavens, and humans didn't deserve and humans couldn't handle being so close to the heavens. Michael Heiser, in his book, The Unseen Realm, says this about mountain peaks. He says, mountain peaks were the domain of gods because no humans lived there. Mountain peaks touched the heavens. And if you read through Scripture, you come across all sorts of important things that happen on mountains. We come across Mount Sinai. We come across Mount Carmel. We come across that amazing interaction between Elijah and the prophets of Baal as they're making sacrifices. You come across the mountain of the Lord, Mount Zion. Over and over again, we see these important events happen on top of mountains. And if you read through the story of Babel, we read through this and we immediately think they're just building maybe I shouldn't say we, maybe I should say I. For years and years, I thought, like, they're building like a Tower of Pisa. You know, that's the tower that we're thinking of here. But what they are building is something that will get higher and higher and higher and will replicate a mountain peak so that they can be in the place of the gods, so that they can be in the place of God. Because they're not invited to the mountain, they decide they're going to build their own mountain. So to recap where we've been this morning, I told you to hang on to two things. One, salt that isn't salty isn't, okay? And light that doesn't shine isn't. And mountaintops or hills, those are the place of the gods. And with all of that as our backdrop, we jump back into the Sermon on the Mount that we've been walking through for the past 5 weeks. And we see Jesus say these words in Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 16. He says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt should lose its taste, how can it be made salty? It's no longer good for anything but to be thrown out and trampled by men." Church, I don't want us to miss what he's getting at here. This is kind of like that moment where Jesus looks at his followers and he says, and if salt were to lose its taste, if salt were to lose its saltiness, and it's like he's giving them a wink, like, in other words, it's impossible. It's no longer salt. It can't be salt and lose its saltiness. And he continues in verse 14, he says, "You are the light of the world. A city situated on a hill, on a mountain peak, where the place of the gods cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp and puts it under a basket, but rather on a lampstand, and it gives light for all who are in the house. And in the same way, let your light shine before men, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven." Church, what this moment is in Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 16, this is a pivot moment in the Sermon on the Mount that we've been going through. Up to this point, Jesus has been talking to his followers. He's been leaving words for us that this is what it looks like to have the good life. And I mentioned last week that when you're reading these things, the Beatitudes, we call them, the Blesseds, the Ashrays, the good life, they don't look like the good life. It's the good life to mourn. It's the good life to be powerless. No, that doesn't feel like the good life at all until you attach his promises to it. Those who mourn have the good life because they'll be comforted. The promise comes in after it. And to this point, Jesus has been walking through, these are the people that I'm calling, these are the people that I'm forming, this is what this life is going to look like. You're going to be persecuted, but you're going to be called children of God, and you're going to inherit the kingdom of heaven. He's been walking us through this, and at this pivot moment, this is where the rubber meets the road. Okay, you want the good life. You want these things. Who wouldn't want the good life? And he's been showing us that the good life in the kingdom is not the same as the good life on earth. It's not the same as the good life in America. And now he begins to go into this moment where, yeah, that didn't look like the good life without the promises, but the remainder of the sermon is going to be impossible without being fully committed to being a follower of Jesus. That you can't just be half in and half out. You can't be trying to toe the line and to walk along the top of the fence. At this point in the sermon, he's been walking through what the good life looks like, and now he says, but here's the deal. You're either in or you're out. There isn't, today I'm in, today I'm out. Today I'm in, today I'm out. No, he says when salt loses its saltiness, it gets tossed. It's worthless. It doesn't just get to decide the next day that it wants to be salt again. And when the light goes out, remember, this isn't 25th century. You don't flip the switch back on. When the light goes out, it's dead. It's done. It's extinguished. Either you will be a people who will be the preservative of the covenant of God in the world, either you or you won't. Either you'll be the people who bring purity into unclean moments. Salt is used to purify water. Either you'll be that or you're not. Either you will share a meal with people in the kingdom of God or you won't. Either you're salt or you're not salt. And if you're not salt, these aren't my words, these are his, you'll be thrown out. He says either you will shine what it looks like to not compromise, to choose selflessness over greed, to choose others over power and control, or you won't. Either you will shed the light on right relationships and mercy, or you won't. There's not one day I will and one day I won't, and one moment I will and one moment I won't. You're either light or you are extinguished. And he says, if you want to be light and you want to be salt, I've got a pretty incredible mission for you. And I want us to actually jump back to a prophet who came years before Jesus to look at what that mission looks like. The prophet Isaiah received a vision of what it looks like to be salt and light in the world way before Jesus ever uttered the words. In Isaiah chapter 42, God is talking to Isaiah, and Isaiah is writing it down for us. And God says, I, Yahweh, have called you for a righteous purpose, and I will hold you by your hand. I will keep you and appoint you to be a covenant for the people and a light to the nations, in order to open blind eyes, to bring out prisoners from the dungeon and those sitting in darkness from the prison house. Jesus is reflecting upon what Isaiah said years earlier when he says that the salt and light to the nations is supposed to be us. It's supposed to be you and me. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and that was the light in the darkness. And now he is saying, you are that light in the darkness. You are the ones who are to preserve the covenant that I have made with the people of this world. You are the one that is supposed to be the city up on a hill, being the beacon that is inviting people to the kingdom of God, inviting people to the place where God is. You are to be the peacemakers. You are to be the ones seeking right relationships. You are to be the merciful ones. You are to be the ones who are going through life with right motivations. And that's why how we relate to others matters. Even those who we would consider to be our enemies. That's why how we forgive others matters, no matter how bad they hurt us. That is why how we love and how we selflessly serve and how we express anger and how we live patiently, that's why all of those things matter. That's why what you think of women and what you think of immigrants and what you think of minorities and what you think of the oppressed and what you think of the widow and what you think of the sick and the poor, that's why all of those things matter. And whether or not they line up with the way that God looks at people and God interacts with people will be whether or not we are shining the light in the world that glorifies God or whether or not we are just like everybody else. Whose light are you shining? Are you shining the light of a South Knox person or a Knox County person? Are you shining the light of a Democrat or a Republican? Are you shining the American light or are you shining God's light? Are you trying to preserve the way that things used to be in southern Indiana or the way that things used to be in the United States of America? Or are you trying to preserve the covenant that Jesus made with humanity when he went to a cross and he gave up his life and he died and he rose again for us? Whose salt and whose light are you intending to be? And the reality is that many times, and I can't even say some of us because I would have to say all of us, but many times we are the wrong kind of salty church. And truthfully, even within the church, we are more likely to get lit from a bottle than we are from the light of God. And Jesus says that people like that have no place in the kingdom, because you are either salt or you are out. You are a light that shines or you are extinguished. But as with everything with Jesus, see, we can't make salt salty again. We can create new salt, chemically speaking, but we can't make salt that lost its saltiness salt again. And you and I individually, with just the power of my fingers, cannot make light light again. But there is, again, going back to the prophet Isaiah, there's another beautiful vision that Isaiah had, that if we would adopt his heart and the interaction that he has in his vision, then perhaps even for those of us who have lost our saltiness and have lost our light, there is still hope. But church, it will only come through honesty. In Isaiah chapter 6, we read about a vision that he has, and I'm going to summarize the beginning of it. It's as if Isaiah has walked into a black tie affair. One of those places where everybody's dressed up fancy and they're walking down the red carpet and, they're getting out of their convertibles and everybody's snapping pictures of them. And Isaiah has shown up to this place and he looks around and he realizes, wow, these people look incredible and they are dressed to the nines. Like they look so good. And then he looks down at himself and he's like, I'm dressed in rags. Like there is nothing wrong with how you dress when you leave the fields. You've put in a good day's work, you're covered in oil, you're covered in dirt, it's great, it's fine. It's an appropriate attire for the moment that you are in at that moment. And in fact, I was recently informed that there are actually, there's a new style now that's considered cool, to walk around looking like you just got covered in oil. I believe it was explained to me as you are diesel, right? Yes, you're dressed diesel that day. Now, I know that has different connotations, but it has to do with how you're looked, and some people want to look that way. But while that can be appropriate in certain places, when you walk into a banquet or you walk into an awards show, everybody is dressed in a tux with a cummerbund and the little bow tie, and the ladies are dressed in these beautiful, gowns and everything, kind of like going to prom or homecoming or whatever other 100 dances that they have throughout the course of a year that they just really want parents to go buy more stuff for. It's like you're walking in to those things and you're dressed in rags. And that's how Isaiah feels when he walks in and he looks around, and the words out of his mouth are, "Woe is me, for I am ruined." He thought he was just showing up to a work thing, and instead it was this big party. And now he's a little bit embarrassed, or he's a lot embarrassed, because he realizes that what he has on is not appropriate for the moment he's in. Woe is me, for I am ruined, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and because my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts, because now I know that I am not dressed the way that I should be dressed. I am not acting the way should I be acting. I'm not living the way that I should be living. I am ruined. Woe is me. But you note what Isaiah did in that moment is he didn't sit there and look at his clothes and run back outside. He didn't run away. He didn't try and play it off like, no, actually, this is cool these days. You're the ones who look lame, or you're just stuck up. You're a bunch of legalists. Who thinks you got to go to a black tie party wearing a black tie? That's ridiculous. That's overkill. That's how the stuck-up people act. No, he just admits it. And he says, I'm not the person that should be here. I've lost my salt. I've lost my light. And because of his honesty, then one of the seraphim flew to me, and in his hand was a glowing coal that he had taken from the altar with tongs, and he touched my mouth with it and said, "Now that this has touched your lips, your wickedness is removed and your sin is atoned for." Because of Isaiah's honesty And because of his willingness to just say, this is just the way that it is. I'm not going to try and hide it. I'm not going to try and play it off. I'm just going to own up to it. It is because of that confession that the sin is removed and he is made clean again. And it doesn't stop there, and I love this. With confession, we can leave this place, but we can leave whatever moment we realize that we put ourselves in with a renewed mission, a renewed purpose. Because in verse 8, it says, "Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, 'Who should I send? Who will go for us?'" Now remember, just a few verses ago, Isaiah is sitting there going, "I don't deserve to even be in this room." And now when the question is asked, Isaiah says, "Here I am, send me." And you know what the angel doesn't do in this moment? You know what the voice of the Lord doesn't do? He said, "No, just a little bit ago, you were the one who didn't even belong here. Why would I give you any responsibility whatsoever? You are the person with unclean lips." No, the voice of the Lord looks at Isaiah and says, "Go." And not like go, like get out of here, you're ridiculous. But go as in go on the mission. Be the one who's going to take this word out. Be the one who will be the salt. Be the one who will be the light. Church, this point in Matthew chapter 5, it reflects back to Isaiah 42. It reflects back to Isaiah 6. Jesus' words don't just start with Jesus' words. Light didn't just start with a light bulb, but it went back to the beginning, before the beginning of creation, with the light of the world that the darkness ran away from. And then Jesus says, "You are now the light of the world." Don't miss how significant that is. He is the light of the world. And now he's saying, you are the light of the world. How many times do we read Jesus' words telling us how big of a deal we really are? In the kingdom, we have an incredible, incredible mission. In the kingdom, he looks at us and says, "You are a masterpiece." In the kingdom, he says, "I know that you've messed up, but I am the one who can make you clean again." In the kingdom, you have the role of preserving the covenant. And in the kingdom, you have the one of shining light on truth and mercy and forgiveness and justice. And in the kingdom, you get to invite others into the banquet. You are the light of the world. This is the pivot point in the sermon, where he has spent time talking about the Beatitudes, what we call them, the Beatitudes. And this is what it looks like to have the good life. This is the people that I'm calling. This is who I'm forming them into. And this is what life will look like. But at this moment, he begins to say, and this is how you'll live it out. Church, the reality is, as we jump into the rest of the sermon, and really just into chapter 5, it's going to be hard. In fact, it's going to be impossible. As we read his words on lust, and we read his words on anger, and we read his words on divorce, and we read his words on taking oaths, and we read his words on how we interact with our enemies, and we read his words on revenge, as we read all of these words, it's going to be impossible if we are not all in. If we are not fully committed, if we think that one day we can be salt and the next day not, and one day we can be light and the next day not, if we think that we can walk with feet in both worlds, it will be absolutely impossible. And those aren't my words. Those are just a summary of what Jesus tells us. Because salt that isn't salty isn't salt. And light that isn't shining isn't light. city on a hill cannot be hidden. Let your light shine before men, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. My prayer has been for the past month and a half, and it's going to continue to be as we move forward in the Sermon on the Mount, is not that we would read it and we would see legalism, not that we would read it and we would see a bunch of rules, but that we would read it and we would see life that is available. This week, if you pick up a devotion, you're going to see an analogy in there of when my kids ask, they don't anymore, but when they would ask for ice cream before bed, I would say no. And that wasn't because I didn't want them to enjoy ice cream. It was because I knew they wouldn't get good sleep. And I knew that in the long run, it would backfire, and it would actually make their life worse to have ice cream before bed. And my prayer is that we will look at the words of Jesus in his Sermon on the Mount, not as he's trying to strip us of enjoyment, but he's actually trying to give us the best life. This week, I pray that we would walk out and we would let our lives shine, that we would be the salt and the light in the city on a hill right here in southern Knox County, Indiana. God, thank you for your words. I know that they can seem very in your face, and actually when we share them, if we don't fall back on them being your words, they sound like an individual who is just saying that they're better than everybody else. But God, that's not what this is at all. What I believe that your words are the invitation to the good life. They're the invitation to the best life that we could have. God, we constantly search for identity and we constantly search for purpose in this world, and you lay it out for us. And so I pray that we would open our eyes, that we would let the light shine on the words that you've given us and on the life that you are leading us to. And that it wouldn't start in a week and it wouldn't start in a month, but that it would start today. And God, if there's anybody in here this morning who is sitting here thinking, I need that life, I don't have that life, I want that life, Lord, may they not leave here today, may they find myself or somebody else and pull them aside and say, I want to know what that life looks like. God, I thank you that we don't have to do it on our own. That we have you, we have your Holy Spirit, but you also gave us each other to walk through this. God, give us the courage to lean on one another as we walk through this and the power of your word. Amen.